Have you ever just known something felt off? That little voice inside whispering, is this really true?
Uh,
We've all been there, haven't we?
oh, absolutely.
Maybe it's a gut feeling about, I don't know, a friend's excuse or a colleague's really vague answer, or even something you hear in the news that just doesn't quite sit right. We crave clarity, right? We want to know when we're being misled.
It's a universal human experience, yeah, and for good reason. Our intuition, it's a powerful alarm system, but it's not exactly a reliable detector on its own.
Mm,
What's fascinating, though, is that while our gut can definitely prompt us, there's actually a systematic, objective approach to truly understanding the nuances of truth and deception.
a system.
Yeah, a method honed in environments where, frankly, getting it wrong could have catastrophic consequences.
Wow. Okay, so today we're taking a deep dive into something I find incredibly compelling.
Hmm.
How to spot deception, the CIA way.
Mm-hmm.
We're drawing on the insights from this book, Spy the Lie. How to Spot Deception the CIA Way by Philip Houston, Mike Floyd, and Susan Carnicero. And our mission really is to equip, and this really matters to you listening right now, no matter what you do, your professional walk of life. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Are you wondering if your boss is being straight about job security? Or if a new business partner is being completely transparent? Or even if a politician actually means what they say?
Mm.
The ability to identify indicators of deception, it can profoundly impact your decisions. It's really about empowering you to move beyond just that vague gut feeling
Right.
to a more informed, maybe evidence-based assessment. Okay, let's unpack this a bit. Before we get to how to spot indicators of deception, we first really need to confront why it's so incredibly difficult for us in the first place.
Yeah, that's crucial.
This isn't just about lacking a skill, right? It's about these deeply ingrained human tendencies and communication complexities that just stand in our way.
Exactly. And the authors are super clear on this. There is no such thing as a perfect human lie detector.
Right, no magic bullet.
No, nobody can definitively know if someone is lying unless they already possess the actual truth. What this methodology offers are tools to detect indicators of deception, clues, essentially.
Indicators.
Ah.
Okay, so what are these big hurdles?
Well, we face several pretty formidable obstacles, and one of the most fundamental ones, I think, is our inherent desire to believe other people.
We just want to believe them.
Yeah, it's a kind of societal conditioning, isn't it? A social comfort to trust. We're sort of raised to believe people are innocent until proven guilty. And honestly, we're uncomfortable with the idea of labeling someone a liar. It feels accusatory.
That deep-seated bias to believe, it's a powerful force. The book gives this really compelling illustration with Phil Houston's interview of Omar.
Oh, yeah, the Omar case.
Right, a foreign asset the CIA had trusted for like 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Phil, who's described as this meticulous preparer, he reviewed Omar's file like he was, and this is a quote, coaching his beloved East Carolina University Pirates.
Oh.
He was totally convinced Omar was squeaky clean. And this powerful subconscious bias, it almost blinded him later on when signs of trouble started popping up.
It's a perfect example. It's textbook. If we allow that initial judgment or our own predispositions to creep in, we basically handicap ourselves from seeing the objective data.
Right.
It's not about passing judgment. It's about collecting objective behavioral information. And, behavioral research actually suggests people lie on average at least 10 times a day.
10 times. Wow.
Yeah. No, okay. Many are white lies, to smooth social interactions. But still, lying is common.
That makes perfect sense. Okay, so beyond our desire to believe, what's another big obstacle? You mentioned myths earlier.
Yes, obstacle two. Our reliance on commonly held behavioral myths. We all have them, right?
Definitely. Like if someone avoids eye contact.
Exactly. Or they fidget, or they touch their nose. We automatically, almost instinctively, interpret these as signs of lying.
But they're not reliable.
And that's precisely where we go wrong. The book strongly advises against using these as definitive indicators. There's just insufficient scientific evidence to support them as reliable signs of deception on their own.
Mm-hmm.
These are what the authors later call behavioral cautions, and honestly, they can often mislead us more than they help. We'll get back to those.
Okay, good to know. So
Yeah.
we want to believe people. We rely on myths.
Yeah.
What else makes it so hard?
Well, obstacle 3 is the sheer complexity of communication itself. Think about it. Words are imprecise, aren't they?
Yeah.
We all interpret them through our own filters, our own experiences. But the bigger challenge, maybe, is that research tells us the vast majority of human communication, some say up to 2/3, is nonverbal.
2/3. That's huge.
It is. And so if we're trying to analyze what's being communicated to us, and the bulk of it is nonverbal, how much formal training have most of us actually had in interpreting those cues?
Probably very little.
Right. Very little, typically. We might pick up on obvious nonverbals, sure, but the subtle, often critical ones, they often go completely unnoticed because we just lack a structured framework to interpret them accurately.
Which leads us, I guess, directly to the fourth obstacle, our own personal biases.
Bingo, we all have them. Whether it's rooting for a favorite sports team, or a political leaning, or maybe a deeply held cultural belief.
Can't escape them.
Nope. And the authors really emphasize this. These aren't things you can simply, check at the door when you're trying to assess someone's truthfulness. They profoundly influence our perception.
Yeah, the book has some powerful examples here. Michael Floyd's interview with that 13-year-old girl.
Oh, the satanic cult accusation, yeah.
Right, accusing a cult leader of molesting like 60 children. The overwhelming human bias, your gut reaction, would be to believe this vulnerable young girl, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, you'd want to believe her.
Yet, the systematic application of their model helped Michael uncover that her horrifying story was, in fact, an elaborate fabrication.
It's a sobering example. And similarly, Susan Carnicero's interview with Mary, the woman faking cancer.
To keep her yacht club membership.
And her job, yeah. Our natural human sympathy, our bias, would lean towards believing her, who would fake cancer. But by actively managing that bias, Susan uncovered Mary's calculated deception.
It's a really striking reminder. Our own beliefs can be the biggest blind spots we have. The authors underline that if we don't actively manage our biases, they will consistently trip us up.
And that leads nicely into obstacle number 5, what they call the global behavior assessment. Basically trying to be a human vacuum cleaner.
A human vacuum cleaner.
Yeah, trying to suck up and process all the incoming data, verbal, nonverbal, everything all at once. It's simply overwhelming.
But it sounds logical, doesn't it? I'm going to absorb everything.
It sounds logical, but the book likens it to trying to get a drink of water from a fire hose.
Huh. Okay, get the picture.
It's impossible. You're just bombarded with too much data, and you end up really guessing the significance of behaviors.
Like the folded arms example.
Exactly. If someone has their arms folded, are they withholding information? Or are they just cold? Or maybe that's just comfortable for them. Without a systematic filter, you're just taking a shot in the girt.
So an unfiltered global approach is just inefficient and unreliable.
Totally. We need a systematic way to filter that flood of information. Which brings us, finally, to obstacle number 6. Human behavior isn't necessarily logical.
Wait, what? Isn't logical?
Well, not logical according to our standards. This goes against our natural assumptions of how people should behave, you see.
Okay, explain that.
What we consider logical is based entirely on our beliefs, our moral compass, our life experiences. Deceptive people, however, can exhibit behaviors that seem, peculiar and defy our expectations.
Like Susan's story about her nanny in Jamaica.
That's a great example. Her trusted nanny, Betty, stealing money while Susan was on vacation. Logically, you wouldn't expect someone entrusted with your child's safety to steal from you. It defies that expectation. Or think about Phil's interview with that highly educated foreign asset, the PhD guy.
The one who stood up.
Yeah. When asked about working for other intelligence services, the man suddenly stood up, said, "No, sir," in this very old school way, and then sat back down. Phil just found it peculiar. It didn't fit. Eventually, the man confessed to being recruited by the KGB. Deceptive behavior often doesn't fit into our neatly defined boxes of what makes sense.
So we have to expect the unexpected.
Absolutely. Don't let someone's sophistication or your own assumptions about logic mask potentially deceptive behavior.
Okay, so I've got these 6 big obstacles.
Oh.
Wanting to believe, relying on myths, communication complexity, personal bias, trying to process everything, and illogical behavior. If you had to distill all that down to one critical takeaway for our listener, what's the biggest mental hurdle we need to overcome just to start spotting deception effectively?
That's a good question. I think it's truly about setting aside our pre-existing biases and expectations. We have to acknowledge that our natural inclination to believe, our reliance on those flimsy myths, and our own personal filters are all, frankly, working against us.
So humility.
Yeah, maybe. The biggest hurdle is accepting that we aren't naturally good at this, and we absolutely need a structured method to overcome those inherent human limitations.
Okay, so we've outlined why it's so incredibly difficult. All these obstacles are precisely why Phil Houston, Mike Floyd and Susan Carnicero developed the model, this systematic approach born from really high-stakes polygraph experience but then refined so anyone can use it.
Mm-hmm.
The book shares Phil's journey into the CIA's polygraph division. Apparently, he initially felt he wasn't, cold or dispassionate enough for the job.
Right.
But his deputy chief, George Muslinski, saw it differently. He told him that's exactly what we want because a nice guy type, as he put it, often has a better sense of fairness and maybe a better ability to manage their own biases.
That's interesting.
Yeah, apparently that unique personality was crucial to architecting this whole methodology.
And the beauty of this model, I think, lies in its elegant simplicity. It's built on just one strategic principle and two simple guidelines.
Okay.
The strategic principle is often the most counterintuitive for people. It takes a minute to get your head around it, but it's absolutely essential for success.
All right, lay it on us. What's the strategic principle?
It's called the deception paradox, ignoring the truth to find the truth.
Ignoring the truth to find the truth. Okay, that sounds completely backward. How does that work?
It does sound backward at first, but it's critical for managing bias and reducing that data overload we talked about. To detect a potential lie, you must deliberately ignore truthful behavior that's irrelevant to the core question so it doesn't get processed and doesn't clutter your analysis.
Ignore truthful behavior. Can you give an example?
Sure. Think of Michael's Anil case. This was a university student accused of cheating on an exam. When confronted, instead of addressing the cheating, Anil insisted Michael look at his large photo album filled with pictures of his beautiful home, him with dignitaries, all that stuff.
Okay.
Now, those photos were truthful. He did have a nice home. He did meet those people. But it was entirely irrelevant to the core accusation of cheating.
So he was trying to distract.
Exactly. Anil was trying to create what the authors call a halo-like light around himself, hoping to deflect suspicion by showing off these positive, truthful, but irrelevant things.
I see what you mean now.
Yeah.
So Anil was, as they say, guilty as sin on the cheating, but hoped to influence Michael's perception by presenting these unrelated truths.
Precisely.
So ignoring this truthful but irrelevant data helps manage your own bias, maybe makes you less likely to think, oh, he seems like such a good guy, and it drastically reduces the data overload. You focus only on what actually matters to the question at hand.
Exactly. It's about filtering out the noise. Remember, truthful behaviors can easily be replicated by deceptive people to appear cooperative and honest. Your task is to see past that potential influence.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense now. Ignore the irrelevant truth.
Well, yeah.
Got it. So with that powerful strategic principle in mind, what are the two simple guidelines that make this model actionable?
Right. The guidelines, timing, and clusters. The authors explain that deceptive behaviors, whether they're verbal or nonverbal, are rarely random. They typically occur within a specific time frame after a stimulus, which is usually your question, and they tend to appear in groups or clusters.
Okay, timing and clusters. Let's take the first one.
Guideline 1 is what they call L-squared mode. That's L squared. It stands for look and listen simultaneously.
Look and listen simultaneously. L squared.
Okay. As humans, our brains naturally tend to be either visually dominant or auditorily dominant, right? We're usually more aware of what we're seeing or what we're hearing at any given moment.
Yeah, that sounds right.
But to detect deception effectively using this model, you have to consciously train your brain to process both inputs simultaneously, especially in those critical few seconds after you ask a question.
The book acknowledges this is tough work, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It says your brain will naturally resist wanting to default back to just one mode, sight or sound.
It absolutely will resist. It takes practice. But with that practice, in those few crucial moments following your question, you can condition your brain to capture far more critical information than the average person typically does.
So it's about being fully present, really engaged in a way most of us probably aren't trained for in just everyday interactions.
Exactly. Total focus, looking and listening together.
Okay, L squared mode. And the second guideline, clusters.
Right, the cluster rule. A cluster is defined quite specifically as two or more deceptive behaviors occurring close together.
Two or more, okay?
And crucially, the first deceptive behavior in that cluster must appear within 5 seconds of your question, the stimulus.
5 seconds, that's a tight window.
It is. And then all subsequent deceptive behaviors, whether verbal or nonverbal, that occur after that first one, until there's an interruption or you ask another question, count toward that cluster.
So it's not about just one random fidget or one awkward phrase, but a pattern of these things happening quickly together.
Precisely. Like the book gives an example. A mother asks her daughter about homework. The daughter might first say, "We had a substitute today." That's potentially a convincing statement trying to deflect.
Okay.
Then maybe there's a slight behavioral pause before she gives a direct, but maybe still evasive answer. That combination, the statement and the pause occurring quickly right after the question, that forms a cluster.
Got it. And it's really important to stress, right, that a cluster doesn't definitively prove someone is lying.
Absolutely critical point. A cluster does not equal a lie. It identifies a potential problem area, something that requires more work, as the authors put it. These are strong indicators, but they are not smoking guns.
Indicators, not proof. Okay.
And this is where the idea of the surgical application of the model comes in. It's not about globally assessing someone's entire demeanor, like we discussed with the human vacuum cleaner problem.
Right.
It's much more precise. Think of a surgeon carefully removing a tumor, leaving the healthy tissue untouched. You're looking for that specific potential malignancy of deception related to your specific question.
That's the key aha moment for me. It's
Yeah.
not about just staring someone down or judging their overall nervousness. It's about a precise, focused approach.
Exactly.
Like that surgeon, you're looking for a specific reaction to a specific stimulus, not just general discomfort. Susan Carnicero's experience with that job applicant really drives this home, doesn't it?
The foot fetish case. Yeah, that's a powerful illustration.
When she asked a catch-all question at the very end. What haven't I asked you that you think I should know about that might be a concern?
Mm-hmm.
The applicant shifted uneasily, displayed some nonverbal tells, and then responded with a classic failure to understand a simple question, a deceptive behavior.
Right, that formed a cluster.
And through that targeted probing, prompted by the cluster, she eventually uncovered his disturbing secret, that he drugged his wife to satisfy his foot fetish. Something completely unrelated to the job, but definitely a concern.
And the model allowed her to isolate what specific question was causing the discomfort rather than just sensing some vague general unease throughout the interview. It pinpointed the problem area.
So if we pull all this together, the deception paradox of ignoring irrelevant truth, the L-squared mode of looking and listening, and the cluster rule of spotting patterns within 5 seconds.
Yeah.
What's the core essence of this methodology for our listener? How does it change things?
The core essence, I think, is a radical shift. It's moving away from relying on just your gut feeling or general impressions towards objective observation. It teaches you to filter out irrelevant truths that might bias you, to focus your attention intensely on both verbal and nonverbal cues simultaneously in that critical window, and crucially, to look for patterns, those clusters of deceptive behavior that occur rapidly right after your question. It's all about precision over general impression. Okay, so now let's delve into what deception actually sounds like. What are the verbal cues? It's absolutely crucial to listen intently to how a person responds, not just what they say.
The delivery matters as much as the content.
Often more. Remember, when the facts aren't on someone's side, they usually can't just tell the outright truth, right? So they have to resort to various verbal strategies to obscure, delay, or mislead. These are the verbal tells we're listening for, specifically within that 5-second cluster window after a question.
Okay. So it's not just about what's said, but also maybe what's not said or how it's phrased. I imagine a huge red flag would be any kind of evasion or delay tactics.
Absolutely. That's a major category. We see a whole cluster of behaviors centered around evasion and delay. This includes a direct failure to answer. They just don't give you the information you actually asked for.
They talk around it.
Exactly. Or sometimes it's just silence where an answer should be. Now, sometimes it could be genuine misunderstanding, but if it appears within a cluster, it's a significant red flag.
Okay.
Another common one is repeating the question. You ask something and they repeat it back to you, maybe verbatim or nearly verbatim.
Buying time.
Precisely. It's a way to buy crucial thinking time to formulate a deceptive response. A simple 2 to 3 second repetition can easily buy them 20 or 30 seconds of mental processing time while sounding like they're just clarifying.
Sneaky. What else falls under delay?
Then there are non-answer statements. These are phrases that sound like part of a response but actually provide zero substance. Things like, "That's a really good question," or "I'm glad you asked that," or "I knew you were going to ask me that."
I've definitely heard those before. They sound cooperative, but they're just verbal filler, aren't they? Stalling tactics.
Exactly. They fill the silence, make them seem thoughtful, but avoid committing to an actual answer immediately. Another related one is reluctance or refusal to answer, like saying, "Gee, I'm not sure I can answer that," or "I'm not sure I'm the right person to talk to about this."
Okay, so evasion and delay are big ones.
Yeah.
What about how people handle denials? That seems critical.
Hugely critical. Deceptive people often have significant denial problems. Instead of a clear, direct, explicit denial, they might offer an absence of an explicit denial. They dance around it.
Like the Dick Cheney example.
Perfect example. His interview with Neil Cavuto about using the F word on the Senate floor. Cavuto asked him directly, and Cheney repeatedly said things like, "That's not the kind of language I usually use," or variations of that. But he never actually said the simple words, "I did not use the F word." It was a masterclass in sounding like a denial without actually issuing one.
That's incredibly subtle, but really powerful when you point it out. It sounds like they're denying, but they're leaving themselves wiggle room.
Exactly. Or they might offer a non-specific denial. Instead of saying, "I didn't do it," they say something vaguer, like, "I would never do something like that." It refers to their character, not the specific act.
Or sometimes they bury the denial, right?
Yes, the isolated delivery of denial. They might give a very brief no, but bury it within a long, rambling, often irrelevant answer. The denial itself gets lost.
Okay, denial problems. Got it. What about when someone gets defensive? When they go on the offensive?
Ah, yes,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a classic indicator. Attack behavior. When someone feels cornered or threatened by a question, they might attack the questioner's credibility, competence, or motives.
Trying to turn the tables.
Precisely. Jeffrey Skilling of Enron famously called that analyst an asshole during a conference call when asked tough questions. Kids do it all the time too, right? Why do you always pick on me? It's an attempt to shift the focus, make you defensive, and get you to back off.
Makes sense.
Related to this are inappropriate questions used as a response. Instead of answering your question, they answer with a question of their own, often one that doesn't directly relate, but hints at their underlying concern.
Like the example in the book about the missing laptop.
Yeah, someone's asked about their fingerprints being on a missing laptop, and they respond, "How much did that laptop even cost?" It doesn't answer the question, but it reveals they might be worried about the perceived value or consequences rather than the act itself.
Okay, so we've got evasion, denial issues, attacks.
Mm-hmm.
What about the actual content? Are there ways the words themselves, even if they seem straightforward, can be deceptive?
Absolutely. One category is overly specific answers. This can go two ways. First, the answer might be too technical or narrow.
Narrowing the scope.
Yes. Like a CEO asked about overall sales might say, "Well, our domestic sales are up higher than we expected." It sounds good, right? But maybe domestic sales are only 10% of their business, and global sales actually tanked. They answered truthfully, but in a narrow way that concealed the bigger negative picture. Think of Bill Clinton's infamous, "It depends on what the meaning of the word is." He was trying to narrow the definition of sexual relations.
Right, the overly legalistic answer.
The other type of overly specific answer is when it's too detailed or exhaustive. Someone asks for their job title, gives you a 5-minute description of their duties instead of just saying accountant.
Why do that?
It creates a halo effect. It makes them seem cooperative, transparent, maybe impressive, while potentially avoiding a simpler answer or just filling time.
Interesting. What about politeness? Can that be a tell?
It can be. An inappropriate level of politeness that suddenly appears can be a sign. Someone suddenly starts calling you ma'am or sir repeatedly, or injects compliments like, "Wow, that's a great tie." It's often an attempt to increase likability and subtly influence your perception of them.
Trying to charm their way out.
Yeah.
And the opposite, being dismissive.
Yes, an inappropriate level of concern. They might diminish the issue's importance. Why is this such a big deal anyway? Or, more disturbingly, they might joke about grave matters. Scott Peterson, for instance, was observed smiling and seeming inappropriately casual when denying involvement in his wife's murder.
Chilling. Okay, any other verbal tells to listen for?
A few more key ones. Process or procedural complaints. "Why are you asking me this? How long is this going to take?" Often just delaying tactics or deflection. Failure to understand a simple question. Pretending confusion, often to narrow the scope of a potentially trapping question. Referral statements. Referring back to a previous answer, like, as I told the last guy, it uses repetition as a psychological tool to try and build credibility for the statement. And selective memory. Phrases like, "not that I recall," or "to the best of my knowledge." It sounds cooperative, but it provides a psychological alibi if contradictory information surfaces later. They didn't lie, they just didn't recall.
The classic non-denial, denial again. What about qualifiers, words like basically or frankly?
Ugh. Qualifiers are huge. The authors break them into two types. Exclusion qualifiers, like basically, for the most part, generally, probably, fundamentally. These allow someone to give a technically truthful answer while still withholding key information.
Like the bookkeeper example.
Exactly. The bookkeeper, confessing to embezzlement, kept saying, basically, I took the money. Basically, I covered it up. That basically implied there was more to the story she wasn't sharing.
And the other type.
Perception qualifiers. Words like, frankly, honestly, to be perfectly honest, to tell you the truth. Ironically, these are often used not because the person is being honest, but to enhance the perception of their credibility right before they say something potentially deceptive.
Wow, so honestly can mean the opposite.
It often can, yeah. It's a preemptive strike to make you believe what follows.
Okay, there's a lot of verbal tells. But you mentioned earlier one category was the most powerful.
Yes. The most powerful and often the most insidious are what the authors call convincing statements.
Convincing statements. Okay, define those again.
These are statements that are, on the surface, true or at least irrefutable. They're often delivered with genuine emotion, but their primary purpose isn't to convey direct, truthful information about the accusation itself. Their purpose is to convince you, the questioner, of something peripheral, usually about their character or intentions, in the hope that you'll then dismiss the accusation. They leverage your biases and your desire to believe certain things.
Okay, that sounds like it could be really, really difficult to spot in the moment, especially if they seem emotional and sincere. Can you give us that powerful example from Phil Houston again?
Sure. The Oscar case. This was a senior government employee, GS-15 level, under investigation for child molestation.
Right.
When Phil asked him directly if he was sexually involved with children, Oscar scowled, looked him in the eye, and said, "Young man, I would never do that. I am not a pervert." Now think about that. Was it true that Oscar didn't perceive himself as a pervert? Probably. Was it true he held the belief that he would never do that, even while doing it? Possibly, through some twisted rationalization. The statements themselves were about his self-perception and belief, not a direct denial of the actions. And they were delivered with conviction.
So it resonates as a fundamental truth about his character, distracting from the actual question about his behavior.
Precisely. It's so effective because it taps into our assumptions about what kind of person could do such a thing. Another stark example is Susan Smith, the woman who drowned her children and then claimed they were abducted.
Oh, I remember that. Horrifying.
On national television, crying, she famously said things like, "I love my children. Why would I do anything to hurt my kids? I would never hurt my kids." Were those statements technically true about her feelings, separate from her actions? Arguably, yes, in some complex psychological way. They were true, emotionally delivered statements, and they were perfectly consistent with the investigators' initial bias. Moms just don't kill their kids, especially not in Union, South Carolina.
That's chilling. It completely plays on expectations and emotions. So how on earth do you counter something so emotionally resonant and seemingly true? You can't just call them a liar right then.
No, that would backfire. The key, the authors stress, is to neutralize the convincing statement. You acknowledge the statement itself, maybe the emotion behind it, but without agreeing with the implied conclusion about their innocence or character in relation to the core issue.
So how did Phil handle Oscar's "I am not a pervert" statement?
He neutralized it brilliantly. He paused, then said something like, "Listen, Oscar, I happen to have 2 little boys myself, and if I thought for 1 second you were a pervert, I don't think I could stay in the same room with you."
Whoa.
See what he did?
Yeah.
He acknowledged the loaded word pervert and Oscar's sentiment, even related it to his own feelings, but he didn't validate Oscar's self-perception as an innocent man in that specific context. He neutralized the emotional power of the statement.
And then what?
And then he immediately returned to the original line of questioning about the specific behaviors. By neutralizing the convincing statement, he prevented Oscar from gaining psychological entrenchment with that defense. And eventually, Oscar confessed to molesting hundreds of children over decades.
Wow, that neutralization technique is incredibly insightful. So convincing statements are so powerful, the book says 2 of them count as a cluster, right?
That's right. They are considered that significant an indicator.
Okay, so if our listeners only remember 2 or 3 key verbal tells from this whole section, what should be at the very top of their list to really listen for?
Good question. I'd say number 1. Listen for any form of evasion or delay, especially a direct failure to answer the question you actually asked.
Okay.
Number 2. Watch carefully for denial problems, specifically the absence of a clear, explicit denial regarding the specific act. Are they dancing around it?
Right.
And number 3, be highly, highly attuned to convincing statements. Those seemingly true, often emotionally charged phrases that don't actually address the core accusation, but try to sway your perception of the person. These are often the most deceptive precisely because they appear so genuine on the surface.
Okay, so we've covered what deception sounds like. Now let's shift to what it might look like. Beyond the words themselves, our bodies often tell a story, sometimes whether we realize it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And just to reiterate that crucial point, we're not talking about general body language here, like someone just seems nervous overall. We're looking for specific, timely, nonverbal responses occurring within that critical 5-second window right after your question.
Exactly. And remember, nonverbals make up the majority of communication, at least 2/3, maybe more. So paying close attention here is absolutely vital. But again, these are not globally assessed. You're not looking for someone who just fidgets a lot in general.
Right.
You're looking for specific behaviors that occur in direct response to your stimulus, your question, and ideally form part of a cluster with other verbal or nonverbal indicators.
Okay. So what are some of the key nonverbal indicators that we should be looking for? Maybe ones that often get missed or misinterpreted.
Well, one fairly clear indicator, though subtle, is a behavioral pause or delay. This isn't just verbal hesitation. It's a noticeable physical stillness or lack of response right before answering, where you'd expect an immediate reaction.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say you ask someone a completely unexpected accusatory question like, "Did you rob the Miller Place gas station 7 years ago?" If they're innocent, the denial should be immediate, right? No, what are you talking about? But if there's a noticeable pause, a stillness, maybe wide eyes for a second before they launch into the denial, that inappropriate delay is a significant nonverbal indicator. Contrast that with asking, "What were you doing 7 years ago today?" A pause there is perfectly normal because they actually have to think. Context is key.
That makes perfect sense. It's about the appropriateness of the pause for the question asked. Okay, what about more physical tells? Things people do rather than just freezing.
We often see brief, almost fleeting hand-to-face activity,
Yeah.
a quick shield over the mouth as they start to speak, or a hand briefly touching or covering the eyes. These can be subconscious attempts to block or conceal. Also very common are grooming gestures. These are little adjustments to clothing, fiddling with a tie, smoothing a shirt cuff or a skirt, adjusting hair. They seem innocuous, but in response to a specific question, they often function as anxiety-reducing behaviors, displacing nervous energy.
Like Phil Houston's example of the CEO in the bathroom.
Exactly. Discussing his new hardware device, which was actually failing badly, every time he proclaimed its success, he would physically cinch his bathrobe tighter around himself.
Wow.
It was this consistent, unconscious gesture, likely dissipating his anxiety about the lie he was telling. He probably had no idea he was doing it.
That's a fantastic, really subtle example of a subconscious reveal through a grooming gesture. What else should we look for?
We also look closely for anchor point movements. These are physical movements of a body part, often a foot tapping, a leg jiggling, maybe shifting weight significantly in a chair that seem to anchor the person to their spot. Like grooming gestures, these often serve to dissipate anxiety and nervous energy.
Anchoring them down while their insides are churning.
Kind of, yeah. Think of the Norman case from the book. This was a large, imposing corporate executive being questioned by Phil Houston about an undisclosed foreign girlfriend. As Phil pressed him with specific questions, Norman, this big exec, literally took off his expensive shoes, pulled his feet up into his chair, and wrapped his arms around his knees. He was essentially sitting in a fetal position in this high-backed executive chair.
No way.
Yes. The authors note this showed he had no awareness of the behavior he was exhibiting, which is a clear sign of extreme stress and likely deception in that context. The anchor point was him retreating into himself.
That's an incredible image. Fetal position.
Okay.
Any others?
Another one is tidying up surroundings. Suddenly rearranging objects on a desk, straightening a pile of papers, adjusting their chair position right after a question. Again, it's often a displacement behavior to manage anxiety. Also, watch for sudden throat clearing or swallowing. This can be a sign of dry mouth, which is a common physiological response to anxiety.
Okay. And what about when the words and the body language just don't line up at all?
Ah, yes, the verbal-nonverbal disconnect. This is a very strong indicator. It's when the words say one thing, but the body language says the opposite, often simultaneously. The classic example is someone vigorously nodding their head yes while verbally saying no. That immediate, blatant contradiction is hard to miss and usually very significant.
It sounds like, just like the verbal tells, these nonverbal cues are rarely just isolated incidents if they're meaningful. They're part of that bigger picture, that cluster.
Precisely. The real power comes from seeing these behaviors occurring in clusters, 2 or more, verbal or nonverbal, happening together within that 5-second window immediately following your question. That's when you know you have a potential problem area, something that warrants more exploration, more questions. One twitch or one means very little. A cluster means pay attention.
Okay, this next part is where it gets really interesting, I think. Sometimes, even when someone is actively trying to mislead you, their words, if you listen very, very carefully, can actually betray the truth they're trying so hard to hide. It's like finding a secret message hidden in plain sight. The authors call these unintended messages. Deceptive people, in their effort to cover the truth, often convey truthful information they don't even realize they're revealing, especially if you interpret their statements very literally.
This is such a powerful concept because it cleverly leverages the imprecise nature of language against the deceptive person. They choose their words incredibly carefully, trying to protect themselves, right?
Right.
But sometimes that very precise choice of words inadvertently reveals more than they intended. It can offer you a window into their actual thoughts or the reality they're trying to obscure.
Okay, I need an example of this, truth and the lie. Give me one of those unintended messages.
Okay, a great one from the book is Sanjay Kumar, the former CEO of Computer Associates, who was accused of massive accounting fraud.
Right?
In defending his company, he stated publicly that their new business model involved a new way of selling and a new way of counting revenue.
A new way of counting revenue.
Exactly. Listen to that literally. What is accounting fraud, if not a new way of counting revenue? The unintended message, hidden in plain sight, was a literal description of the fraud itself.
Wow, he said it right out loud.
He did. And later in the same defense, he described his explanation of the company's finances as plausible. Think about the word plausible. It means superficially reasonable or believable, but doesn't necessarily mean true.
So he was implying it wasn't strictly true, just believable.
Precisely. By choosing plausible, he was conveying what he could say, that it sounded okay on the surface, but subtly signaling it wasn't the whole, unvarnished truth.
That's a powerful example of reading between the lines, or maybe more accurately, literally reading the lines they give you. It brings to mind that other example, Herman Cain.
Ah, yes, the politician facing sexual harassment allegations.
Right. He stated that previous accusations against him were baseless and false because, and this was his specific reason, the accusers weren't able to come up with any documentation, any proof, or anything that was credible.
Listen closely to that wording again.
The unintended message seems stark. The allegations were false, only because they couldn't be proven, not necessarily because the underlying events didn't happen. He wasn't denying the act itself, was he? He was denying the existence of proof.
Exactly. You see this pattern frequently. The language focuses on the lack of evidence or the accuser's credibility rather than a direct denial of the behavior. It's a subtle but crucial distinction revealed by their word choice.
Okay, that's fascinating. The book also talks about a specific type of question that's really good at unearthing these unintended messages. The punishment question.
Yes, the punishment question is an incredibly powerful opinion question that often elicits revealing unintended messages. You simply ask, what do you think should happen to the person who did this, whatever this is?
That sounds like a bold question to ask someone you suspect. How does it work? Why is it effective?
Well, the theory and observation is this. Truthful people, when asked about a crime or wrongdoing they didn't commit, tend to suggest fairly severe punishment, generally aligning with societal norms of justice for that act. They have no personal stake in leniency.
Okay.
Deceptive people, on the other hand, when asked what should happen to the person who did the thing they actually did, often suggest abnormally lenient punishment, or they might deflect and avoid answering the question entirely. Why? Because psychologically, they are effectively sentencing themselves.
Wow. Sentencing themselves. That makes sense. Can you give an example of that?
Michael Floyd's interview with a 20-year-old male who had sexually abused 2 young girls is a really potent illustration from the book.
Okay.
When Michael asked him the punishment question, what should happen to the person responsible, the suspect said, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, well, I would not want jail time for that person. I think anybody who goes into jail is going to come out with a whole other mind, maybe some kind of course or something. Counseling. Perhaps an apology.
Counseling and an apology for child abuse.
Exactly. The suggested punishment was shockingly lenient given the gravity of the offense. The unintended message was crystal clear. I did it, but please don't send me to jail.
That's chillingly clear.
Yeah.
Another example was the father accused of injuring his baby son, right?
Yes. When asked the punishment question, he said something like, oh, it's really a touchy thing. They definitely need to get some help, some serious help. Notice the deflection touchy thing, focusing on help rather than punishment, the unintended message. That question is really sensitive and makes me extremely uncomfortable because I'm the one who did it and I need help.
Wow. And you could apply this principle even in everyday situations, right? The book suggests using it with kids.
Yeah, the grape juice stain on the couch example for parents. If you have two kids, both denying they made the stain, you can separate them and ask each one individually what the punishment should be for whoever did spill the juice. If one kid suggests, say, no computer for a week, which is a general, fairly harsh kid punishment, and the other kid suggests, well, maybe they shouldn't get any grape juice for a week, focusing specifically on the forbidden item with a seemingly lighter sentence, well, you probably have more work to do exploring things with the one suggesting leniency related to grape juice.
Huh. That's clever. The idea that someone's precise word choice or their reaction to a question like the punishment question can betray their hidden truth is such a game changer. What's the biggest takeaway for our listeners from this whole section on unintended messages?
I think the biggest takeaway is to cultivate a habit of deep, analytical listening. Don't just hear the surface meaning. Listen for how things are said, the literal meaning of the words chosen, the potential implications. Deceptive people often choose their words with extreme care to protect themselves, and ironically, that very precision can inadvertently reveal the truth they're trying so desperately to hide. It's about listening through the words sometimes. Okay, so we've talked about recognizing verbal and nonverbal indicators and even hidden messages, but none of that matters much if you're not asking the right questions in the first place. This raises an important point. How do we craft questions that actually compel information, or at least elicit those valuable deceptive behaviors we've been discussing, rather than just allowing someone to stick to their prepared script?
That's crucial. The book really hammers this home, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The model is only as good as the questions you ask. They use the O.J. Simpson interview example again here. The detectives asked very open, non-presumptive questions like, when was the last time you saw Nicole? This allowed Simpson to just launch into his narrative, his timeline, for like 18 minutes without interruption.
Right. He controlled the narrative. They lost the advantage because he was never put into a position where he had to process something unexpected or challenging. He just recited his story.
So what's the alternative? How do you ask questions differently?
One key technique is using presumptive questions. These questions presume something related to the matter at hand, even if you don't know it for sure.
Okay, how does that work?
It puts a potentially guilty person into processing mode. Instead of just issuing a simple denial, they're forced to stop and consider, wait, what does this person know? How much do they know? How should I answer this? It disrupts their script.
So instead of asking O.J., were you at Nicole's house last night? Which invites a simple no.
You'd ask something presumptive like, what happened at Nicole's house last night? This presumes the possibility that he was there, or at least knows something about what happened there, and puts the onus on him to explain, rather than just deny. It's designed to compel a response they probably haven't rehearsed.
I see. It forces engagement on a different level. The book mentions Phil Houston using this really effectively with Tom, right? The nurse suspected of stealing drugs.
Yes. A fantastic example of opening strong. Tom comes in for the interview, likely expecting questions like, did you steal drugs? Instead, Phil's opening question was presumptive. Tom, of all the missing drugs, how many did you take from the hospital?
Wow, straight out of the gate, what happened?
Tom was completely caught off guard. He hadn't prepared for that direct presumption of guilt. He processed for a moment and then confessed. The presumptive question bypassed his defenses.
That's incredibly direct and clearly effective. Okay, so presumptive questions are one tool. What about bait questions? Those sound intriguing.
Bait questions are another powerful tool. These are typically hypothetical questions that are designed to trigger what the authors call a mind virus in the deceptive person.
A mind virus.
Yeah, it makes their mind start racing with possibilities and potential consequences. You're baiting them with a hypothetical scenario that touches on their possible exposure.
Give me an example.
Okay, instead of asking directly, did your next door neighbor see you breaking into the shed last night? Which they can just deny.
Right.
You could use a bait question like, is there any reason, Tom, that any of the neighbors might tell us that they saw you in the vicinity of the shed last night?
Is there any reason? It's hypothetical, broader.
Exactly. It's not a direct accusation the neighbor saw you, but it forces Tom to consider the possibility that someone saw him, and what the implications might be if they talk. It baits him into revealing concern or formulating an explanation rather than just issuing a flat denial. Generally, broader is better with bait questions, anyone, any reason.
Okay, that makes sense. The book draws a distinction here between bait questions and bluffs.
Right? Yes, very important distinction. Bluffs saying something like, we have your fingerprints all over the scene, when you don't, are risky. They rarely work against someone who knows the truth, and if your bluff gets called, you instantly lose all credibility and turn the interview adversarial.
Right.
Bait questions, however, are on solid ground because they deal with factual possibilities. It is possible a neighbor saw something. It is possible their fingerprints might be found. You're not lying, you're exploring possibilities, which is much safer and more effective.
Got it. Bait, not bluff. Okay, beyond these specific types of questions, the book also emphasizes just the basic mechanics of how you formulate and deliver any question.
Absolutely critical. To ensure you get a clear response and that any deceptive indicators you observe are genuinely linked to your question, and not just confusion, you need to.
Keep it short.
Yes. Keep questions short and to the point. Keep them simple. Avoid jargon or complex language. Crucially, keep them singular in meaning. Avoid asking compound questions like, did you go to the party and did you see Sarah there? Ask one thing at a time. And finally, keep them straightforward. Build trust through clarity. Don't try to be tricky with convoluted questions.
And delivery matters too, right? Especially for those presumptive and bait questions.
Hugely. Neutral delivery is crucial for presumptive and bait questions. You need to ask them in a calm, matter-of-fact tone. You want the person to feel like you have no preconceived notions about their answer, that you're just gathering information.
So no accusatory tone.
Definitely not. An accusatory tone will just trigger defenses immediately. A neutral tone avoids influencing their response and allows their natural behaviors, hopefully including deceptive indicators if they're present, to emerge more clearly.
Okay, that makes sense. And what about follow-up? Because people often don't give you everything you need in their first answer, especially if they're being deceptive.
That's where persistence and good follow-up questions come in. You absolutely cannot just accept the first thing someone tells you, especially if it feels incomplete or evasive. The simple phrase, what else, can be incredibly powerful.
What else?
Just like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It conveys that selective information is not an option, that you expect the full story, beyond what else. While there are different types of follow-ups, evaluation questions, how do you know that? Where did you get that information? Exploration questions, tell me more about that, walk me through that again, and clarification questions. When you say they, who specifically are you referring to? Which Sam are you talking about?
It's about peeling the onion layers.
Exactly. The book uses the example of a police officer separating Dan and Dana after a car accident. Dana says, the light was green. Look, I've been driving for 20 years and I've never had an accident before.
Right. That's a referral statement. I've been driving.
Yeah.
And a convincing statement. Never had an accident.
Yeah, precisely. The officer can't just accept that. It requires follow-up. Okay, Dana, tell me more about what you saw just before the intersection. You have to probe beyond those initial deflections.
Makes sense. What about open-ended versus closed-ended questions? Is one better than the other?
Both are valuable, just for different purposes. Open-ended questions, tell me what happened, are great for gathering an initial narrative, letting the person talk freely. Closed-ended questions, was the light red or green, are better for testing specific facts or details within that narrative, or for pinning down specifics after evasive answers. You need both in your toolkit.
And we already touched on opinion questions like the punishment question.
Right, those solicit feelings or judgments and can be very revealing.
And finally, for any last lingering doubts or things they might have omitted, I know the book highlights the power of catch-all questions.
They are absolutely essential, especially for uncovering lies of omission, which can be the hardest to detect. You ask these at the very end of exploring a topic, or at the end of the entire interview.
Like the one Susan Carnicero used.
Exactly. What haven't I asked you that you think I should know about? Or variations like, is there anything else at all related to this that might be important for me to know? It gives them one final opportunity to disclose something they've been holding back, and their reaction to that question itself can be very telling.
Okay, so if there's one overarching principle for crafting effective questions based on all this, what would it be? How should our listeners think about questioning?
I think the most important principle is to consciously shift from just letting someone talk to actively controlling the conversation and compelling specific responses rather than letting a potentially deceptive person control the narrative.
Hmm.
This means moving beyond simple, easily denied yes, no, or basic informational questions and strategically using tools like presumptive questions and bait questions to put them into that crucial processing mode where they have to actively consider what you might know and how they should respond. It's about making them think, not just react. ###7. Managing deception to gain the advantage.
Okay, so you've asked good questions. You've maybe spotted some deceptive clusters. Now you're at a point where you sense the person has information they really don't want to share.
Yeah.
They've drawn a line in the sand, what the book calls the cliff moment.
Right. They feel like if they take one more step towards the truth, they're going over the edge and will suffer consequences they want to avoid.
So as the interviewer, or just the person asking questions, what do you do then? The instinct might be to just hammer on the question, right? Tell me the truth, did you do it?
Yeah, that's the instinct, but it's often counterproductive. Hammering on a question often forces a deceptive person to just repeat their lie, digging their heels in further. The more times they say no, the easier it actually gets for them psychologically to maintain that stance. They become entrenched.
So the goal isn't to force a confession through repetition.
No. The goal is actually to minimize their opportunity to keep verbalizing the deception. Instead, you want to create pathways, make it psychologically easier for them to step back from that cliff edge and disclose the information you need.
Okay, how do you do that? How do you manage the situation to gain the advantage without just causing them to shut down?
Well, one simple thing is to avoid asking negative questions. Questions like, "You didn't flirt with her at the party, did you?"
Why is that bad?
Because it's framed negatively, it almost invites a no. It sets up resistance right away. It's better to ask affirmatively or presumptively, like, "What happened with Sarah at the party?"
Got it. Avoid the negative frame. What else?
A key set of techniques involves using question prologues. These are short narrative explanations or statements you make right before asking a sensitive question. They're designed to prime the information pump, making the person more receptive to answering truthfully.
Priming the pump. Okay, what kinds of prologues are there?
The book outlines a few. One is the legitimacy statement. This involves briefly explaining why the question is important or necessary, establishing the legitimacy of your need to know. It can help gain cooperation by showing you're not just being nosy.
Okay. Like, we need to clear this up for the report.
Exactly. Another powerful one is rationalization. Here, you offer a socially acceptable, face-saving reason for why someone might have done the action in question. Things like, "Look, nobody's perfect," or "Everyone makes mistakes sometimes," or "In the heat of the moment, things happen."
So it makes it sound less like a terrible, unique crime and more like a common human failing.
Precisely. It can lower their defenses and make it psychologically easier for them to confess by giving them a kind of out, a way to frame their actions that feels less damning. Another related one is minimization. This involves downplaying the potential consequences or seriousness of the act.
Like, hey, no one wants to blow this completely out of proportion.
Exactly. However, there's a huge ethical caution here from the authors. You must never use minimization to mislead someone about the actual severity or legal consequences if it involves a crime. That crosses a serious ethical line. But for lesser transgressions, it can be effective.
Right. Crucial ethical point. Any other prologues?
One more is projection of blame. This involves subtly shifting some of the blame away from the interviewee and onto external factors or other people.
How would that sound?
Maybe something like, sometimes leadership doesn't take enough time to explain the rules clearly, or this kind of pressure environment can make anyone cut corners. Again, you're not excusing the behavior entirely, but you're making it seem less like a sole personal failing, which can make it easier for them to talk about.
So these prologues are all about making it less threatening for them to approach the truth. What if someone simply denies something outright, even with a good prologue?
Yep.
Nope, didn't happen.
If you hit a hard denial on a specific point, you might try the possibility strategy. Instead of asking directly, "Did you meet with Mr. X on Tuesday?" which they can easily deny if they're being deceptive.
Right.
You shift to possibility. Is it possible that the two of you might have crossed paths sometime on Tuesday? It's much harder for someone to definitively claim something is impossible if they concede it's possible, even vaguely.
And you have an opening.
Exactly. You can then transition smoothly to, okay, so if it's possible, what do you remember about Tuesday? What interactions might have happened? You're gently moving them from the absolute impossible denial to possible, to exploring their actual memory. It keeps the conversation moving forward.
That's a clever way to keep the door open. And what if they give you a response that feels very narrow, maybe technically true, but clearly deceptive by omission?
Yes. That's when you need to broaden your focus. If someone gives you a narrow, potentially deceptive response, the example used before was, I experimented with marijuana one time, when you suspect broader drug use,
Right.
resist the urge to just hammer on that specific statement. Are you sure it was only one time? Instead, broaden the scope immediately with a presumptive question. Okay, thanks for sharing that. What other things have you tried?
So you accept the narrow statement, but immediately push beyond it.
Yes. It explores beyond the cliff they tried to establish with their narrow answer, gently pushing them to reveal more without directly challenging the initial statement. Similarly, if someone shares multiple pieces of information, especially about a sensitive topic like, say, a progression of drug use or escalating thefts,
Yeah.
the advice is to explore in reverse order. Don't start with the first, likely less serious thing they admitted to. Start your detailed questioning with the last thing they mentioned, as it's often the most serious and the most difficult for them to have shared. They'll be less psychologically prepared for you to immediately dive deep into the thing they just barely admitted. Don't just accept the first thing they tell you and stop there.
This all sounds like a real psychological chess game, constantly anticipating their moves and managing their resistance. What's the core mindset you need to adopt to truly gain the advantage in these situations without just becoming an interrogator?
That's a great way to put it. The core mindset, I think, is a blend of patience and persistence coupled with strategic empathy. You're not trying to trap them or corner them like a prosecutor.
Right.
Instead, you're trying to create the psychological conditions using these techniques where telling the truth ultimately becomes easier or at least less threatening for them than continuing to maintain the lie. It's about being an expert, neutral guide through their own internal conflict about disclosure.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. We have the tools, the techniques like L-squared and clusters, the questioning strategies, the ways to manage resistance. You feel like you're getting equipped. But just as important as knowing what to look for is knowing what not to rely on.
Absolutely crucial.
Let's clear up some of those common misconceptions, those myths we talked about earlier. Because as the book points out, popular portrayals of lie detection, like, Dr. Cal Lightman from that show Lie to Me.
Yeah, great show. But
Right. Makes for good TV. But the authors are clear it's not really practical or reliable for real-world application.
not at all. These are what the authors categorize as behavioral cautions. Things commonly believed to indicate deception, but are actually unreliable when used in isolation or without the full context of the model.
So what's first on the caution list? Microexpressions, those super fast facial flashes.
Yes, microexpressions. They get a lot of hype. And while these split-second, involuntary facial movements can reflect genuine underlying emotions like fear, anger, surprise, disgust, they have two major limitations for deception detection.
Okay, what are they?
First, there's no specific microexpression for deception itself. There isn't a lying face. You might see fear or stress, but that could be fear of being caught lying, or fear of not being believed even when telling the truth, or just general anxiety about the situation.
So the expression doesn't tell you the cause of the emotion.
Exactly. And second, they are incredibly impractical to spot reliably in real-time conversation without extensive specialized training and often slow-motion video analysis. It just doesn't work for everyday interactions. Good for TV drama, not practical application.
Okay, so microexpressions are out as a reliable standalone tool. What about the biggest myth of all? Eye contact.
Yes, eye contact. Probably the most widely believed myth about lying that liars avoid eye contact. The reality is, it's completely unreliable as an indicator of deception.
Why?
Well, think about it. Some people naturally make less eye contact due to shyness, cultural norms, or neurological reasons like autism. Others might increase eye contact when lying, either to try and appear more sincere or as a way to challenge the questioner. And prolonged eye contact can signal intimacy in one context or aggression in another.
So the same behavior can mean opposite things.
Precisely. The behavior itself is ambiguous. You can't reliably assign meaning to eye contact levels alone. Same goes for a hider. Close posture, arms crossed, maybe turned slightly away. often interpreted as defensive or withholding.
It could just be.
They're cold, or that's just a comfortable way for them to sit. It's a global behavior, meaning it's constant, not necessarily linked to a specific question. As the authors say, you can't attach significance to a behavior if you don't know its cause.
Right. That makes sense. What about things like blushing or twitching?
Blushing or twitching, again, unreliable. Yes, anxiety can cause these, but so can lots of other things. Neurological conditions, room temperature, medications, alcohol, or just simple embarrassment that has nothing to do with lying.
Okay. And clenched hands, white knuckles. I hear that one a lot in crime shows.
Yeah, clenched hands are another common but cautioned behavior, often noted in law enforcement settings.
Right.
But again, it's a global behavior. What's causing it? It could be deception-related stress, sure. But it could also be intimidation from the setting, fear of not being believed, even if truthful, anger at being accused, or even just a physical habit. You can't know the cause just from the behavior itself.
So all these things, microexpressions, eye contact, posture, twitching, clenched hands, they fall into the trap of global assessment, right?
Yeah.
Judging the whole person instead of specific responses.
Exactly. Which leads to the final big caution. Baselining, based on this kind of global assessment, is fundamentally flawed.
Explain baselining again.
Baselining is the common idea that you observe someone's normal behavior during supposedly non-threatening questions, and then assume any deviation from that normal baseline during critical questions must indicate deception.
Sounds logical on the surface.
It sounds logical, but the logic is faulty for complex human beings. First, what is normal behavior? It varies hugely. Second, a sophisticated deceptive person might deliberately control their behavior during baseline questions, appearing calm and cooperative, precisely to mislead you.
So they fake the baseline.
They can try, or they might use those convincing statements we talked about early on to build a facade of cooperation, making you misinterpret their actual deceptive behaviors later as just deviations from a faulty baseline.
The book had that really impactful example of baselining going wrong with the female police explorer.
Oh, yes. The young woman accused by a police officer of fabricating a sexual assault claim against him. The investigators, using traditional baselining, concluded she was lying. Why?
Because she didn't act how they expected a victim to act.
Exactly. She showed no signs of being visibly upset or ashamed during the interview. She didn't fit their preconceived notion, their baseline expectation of how a normal teenage victim should behave in that situation.
But she was telling the truth.
Michael Floyd, using the model focused on specific indicators, not global demeanor, determined she was telling the truth. And eventually, faced with inconsistencies, the officer confessed. The investigators' reliance on faulty baselining almost led to a terrible injustice. It highlights the danger of relying on these global assessments and myths.
Wow. Okay, so avoid the myths, focus on the model's specific indicators within clusters. Now, the book dedicates quite a bit of space to analyzing the Anthony Weiner case study specifically, that CNN interview where he was first confronted about the sexting allegations. I remember reading the author's analysis at the time, and it felt incredibly prescient. What did they see in his behavior using their model?
Well, applying the model systematically to the transcript and video of that interview revealed an overwhelming number of deceptive indicators, particularly verbal ones, occurring in rapid-fire clusters.
Like what specifically?
He consistently failed to answer direct questions. He engaged in outright refusal to answer certain points. He responded with inappropriate or disconnected questions back to the interviewer, like that bizarre line about, if I were giving a speech to 45,000 people.
Right, totally irrelevant.
He used clear attack behavior, challenging the interviewer's premise, you want to do the briefing. He relied heavily on non-answer statements and filler. He showed inappropriate politeness at times, using sir and apologizing, likely to manage perception. He used referral statements, refer to my statements. He employed exclusion qualifiers. All I can tell you is this.
And convincing statements too, right?
Oh, absolutely. He repeatedly tried to convince viewers he was solely focused on issues of monumental importance, like the debt limit or fighting for social problems, attempting to create a halo effect of seriousness to deflect from the personal allegations.
So what was the overall conclusion from that pattern?
The sheer volume and consistent pattern of these deceptive indicators, especially the repeated avoidance of direct denials combined with attack behaviors, strongly suggested, according to the model, that there was much more to the story. It indicated a high degree of concern and a conscious effort to conceal information.
And they predicted more would come out.
Yes. Based on that analysis, they specifically predicted what they termed the Tiger Woods phenomenon, that this was likely part of a larger pattern of behavior and that other similar incidents or relationships would inevitably surface. Which, of course, they subsequently did. It was a stark public demonstration of how these clustered indicators can foreshadow undisclosed truths.
It really was. Now, as powerful as these tools are, the book doesn't shy away from the personal toll this knowledge can take and the ethical boundaries involved. There's that story of Ted.
Yeah, the CIA officer who had just taken the training course, he made some joking comment to his wife about having a boyfriend, expecting a laugh. Instead, he noticed a cluster of deceptive behaviors in her response. And he couldn't shake it. He was unable to sleep, just tormented by the what-ifs, by the knowledge he now possessed. It highlights how this skill can sometimes reveal things you might almost rather not know, especially in personal relationships.
So how do you handle that? What's the ethical framework?
Knowledge is most valuable when it's understood and applied responsibly. The authors stress again and again that this ability can sometimes feel like a curse, revealing uncomfortable truths. But crucially, identifying deception, or indicators of it, doesn't make you a judge or jury.
Right, indicators, not proof.
Exactly. It simply provides objective information for further examination or consideration. It's a tool for data collection, not for delivering a verdict. Maintaining that distinction is absolutely crucial for ethical application. It's about seeking clarity, not just confirming suspicions or jumping to conclusions.
And it's interesting, even the authors admit they're susceptible themselves, right? They catch themselves using these behaviors.
Absolutely. They mention finding themselves using convincing statements or being overly specific when they feel uncomfortable or put on the spot. Their own brains, like everyone's, can get in the way of deliberate manipulation. It shows these are deeply human responses to stress or the need to protect oneself.
It makes it feel less like a superpower and more like a heightened awareness of human nature. The book mentions a colleague, Richard, who received a difficult cancer diagnosis.
Yes, an example of an unpleasant truth. Knowing he had cancer was undoubtedly difficult, maybe a truth he'd rather not have faced initially, but ultimately knowing that truth was absolutely in his best interest because it allowed him to seek treatment and take action.
So the underlying message is that truth, even when hard, is usually better than ignorance.
That's the core idea. Ultimately, knowing the truth, even an unpleasant one, is almost always in your best interest because it empowers you to act, to make informed choices, rather than being misled or operating on false assumptions.
Okay, so wrapping up this crucial section on cautions and ethics, what are the key do's and don'ts for our listeners as they start trying to apply this?
The do's are: do practice deliberately, do manage your own emotions and biases, do strive to use these skills for good, for clarity and understanding.
And the don'ts?
Don't make the other person aware you're consciously analyzing or reading them. That changes everything. Don't deviate from the cluster rule. Don't jump to conclusions based on single indicators. And maybe most importantly for personal relationships, don't ask a question if you're not genuinely prepared or sure you want to know the potentially uncomfortable answer.
That last one is huge. So what's the ultimate mission here, beyond just spotting lies? What's the bigger purpose?
The ultimate mission, as the authors frame it, isn't just judgment or accusation. It's about uncovering the truth, recognizing where trust genuinely belongs, and empowering yourself and others to make more informed decisions based on reality. It's about building a clearer picture so you can address problems directly, fix what's broken, and ultimately reinforce the good in humanity by confronting and resolving deception rather than letting it fester. Hashtag tag pay tag outro.
Wow. We have taken quite a remarkable journey today, haven't we? From really navigating that deception detection obstacle course, understanding our own biases, the myths, the complexities, all the way to mastering concepts like L-squared mode and the power of timing and clusters. You listening now, you really have a framework, a new lens maybe, to approach interactions with a whole new level of insight into both the verbal tells and the nonverbal indicators, even including those powerful unintended messages that can hide in plain sight.
And it's worth repeating. Remember, this methodology isn't about turning yourself into some kind of infallible human lie detector or about passing judgment on people. That's not the goal. It's really about gathering more objective data, more information, to inform your own decision-making process and to help you seek clarity in a world that's just filled with complex, often ambiguous communication.
It feels empowering, really. giving you tools to better understand the information you're receiving, maybe build stronger, more authentic relationships where trust is earned, and just navigate challenging situations with a bit more confidence.
Exactly. Confidence based on observation, not just gut feeling.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, here's a final thought to consider, something the authors touch on. They suggest that perhaps the greatest deception in life is to believe that any significant accomplishment is solely one's own, that we don't rely on others.
Interesting point.
And maybe the same applies to truth. The truth, even when it's an unpleasant one, even when it's difficult to hear or accept, is ultimately your truest friend. Why? Because it offers clarity. It gives you a solid foundation, a path forward based on reality. It allows you to choose how to respond, how to act, rather than being unknowingly led astray by misinformation or deception. Ultimately, knowing the truth, however difficult, empowers you to fix problems, to build trust where it genuinely belongs, and to navigate your world with open eyes.